Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Phyllis had been pacing back and forth like a boxed barracuda, her heels clicking against the polished bottom of the Newman Estate's living room, her casket rising and falling in rapid fire, shallow breaths as she tried to maintain control of a situation she had long suspected was twisting out of her grasp. Victor Newman, as assessing and changeable as ever, stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, his dark eyes burning with the admixture of fury, computation, and that infuriating calm that always anteceded disaster. Daniel, unconscious to the full extent of what was about to unravel, had just returned from a meeting at Chancellor Winter's, where he'd been trying, in his usual humorless but frequently naive way, to prove that he could handle the pressures of both family and business. He entered the room, his smile tentative, awaiting maybe a casual family discussion, ignorant that his world was about to be turned upside down in the most particular and ruinous way possible. Phyllis incontinently noticed the pressure in his expression and tried to deflect the discussion, trying to mask her own fear with rehearsed countenance, but it was useless. Victor, having spent the last several weeks making together information that had been hidden from him, precisely observing every subtle slip, every suspicious discussion, eventually decided that enough was enough, that the time for secretiveness and manipulation was over. He moved with the precise, nearly raptorial confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do and what chaos it would unleash. Phyllis, seeing that her position as the conciliator between Victor and Daniel was tenuous at best, tried to intermediate, her voice rising just a notch too loudly, as if sheer volume could delay the ineluctable. "Victor, you do and have to," she began, but before she could finish, Victor's hand shot out with astonishing speed and force, connecting sprucely with her impertinence in a resounding poke that echoed through the room, leaving her stupefied and off balance, her hand flying to her face in unbelief, her lips parting in shock. The room went fully silent for a bit of an alternate, the kind of silence that felt like the calm before an indeed bigger storm. And also Victor spoke, his voice low, but laced with an authority and wrathfulness that made every person in the room blench. "No further falsehoods. No more pretending. Daniel, it's time you knew the verity about your father." Daniel sat mid-step, his expression shifting from confusion to apprehension, his heart beginning to pound in a meter that matched the dread now creeping into his casket. His eyes danced between Phyllis, who was now leaning against the wall for support, visibly shaken and unfit to meet his aspect, and Victor, whose violent regard sounded to pierce directly into his soul. Daniel's mind contended, trying to attune the words with the violent, shocking display he'd just witnessed. "Dad, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice betraying both fear and a hopeless stopgap that ever this was some kind of sick joke. Victor took a deliberate step closer, closing the distance with the ineluctability of a man who had awaited far too long to reveal commodity that would change everything. He spoke again, each word measured, each syllable trickling with the weight of disclosure. "You have been living a taradiddle, Daniel. The man you've always believed was your father, he's not. I've carried this secret for times, but no longer. You need to hear it from me." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. His breathing grew shallow, his palpitation thundering in his cognizance. I do and understand. Are you saying—" He could slightly finish his judgment before Victor continued, implacable, like a force of nature that refused to be denied. "I'm saying that your real father is and who you suppose he is. Phyllis tried to shield you, to cover you from this knowledge, but the verity cannot be hidden ever. You earn to know who you really are. You earn to know your birth, your heritage." Daniel's mind reeled. The conception of identity he'd taken for granted all his life was being ripped down in pieces, leaving him raw, exposed, and pulsing with unbelief. Phyllis, still reeling from the poke, tried weakly to interject, her voice jiggling, "Victor, perhaps we should stay." But he cut her off, his tone sharper now, invested with the frustration of times spent keeping silent while the consequences of deception rotted like a crack. "No, Phyllis. You've done enough. You've had your chance to cover him, to cover the taradiddle. But falsehoods have a way of poisoning the soul, and Daniel deserves the verity, whether you like it or not. Daniel felt as if the bottom had dropped from beneath him. His mind contended through every memory, every moment with the man he'd called Dad, searching for suggestions, for signs he might have missed, for reasons why commodity had always felt slightly out. But nothing could have prepared him for the concession that followed, the words that would ever fracture the foundation of his understanding of who he was and where he came from. Victor took a deep breath, his jaw tight, and also, with all the gravitas of a man delivering a judgment, stated plainly, "Daniel, your real father is Jack Abbott." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of him. His mouth fell open, a silent laugh forming in his throat, and for several heart-stopping moments, he simply goggled at Victor, unfit to reuse, unfit to comprehend that the entire frame of his life had just been rewritten in a single judgment. Memories collided in his mind, each commerce, each vacation, each family moment suddenly reframed in an intimidating new environment, forcing him to rethink every relationship, every decision, every trust he'd ever placed in those around him. Phyllis, now recovering slightly from the shock, stepped forward, her hands raised in a prayer gesture. "Daniel, please, you have to understand it wasn't about hurting you. It was about guarding you." Victor, perhaps, but Daniel was beyond hail, beyond understanding. The disclosure had touched off a storm within him, feelings crashing over him in violent swells, wrathfulness, treason, confusion, heartache, unbelief. He couldn't comprehend the atrocity of fate, the involved web of family secrets that had been spun around him since birth. "Jack, my father?" he eventually rumored, his voice breaking, the weight of the verity pressing down like a physical weight on his shoulders. Victor jounced solemnly, his eyes softening only slightly, but the firmness in his expression remained. "Yes, he's your father. And now you must decide how you want to face that verity, Daniel. You can let it destroy you, or you can use it to understand who you really are." Daniel sank to the nearest president, his hands gripping the armrests as if holding onto some anchor in an ocean of chaos. Every fiber of his being was screaming, every aloud. A question mark. How had this been hidden from him? Why had Victor kept this secret for so long? What did this mean for his connections, for his sense of tone, for the future he'd imagined for himself? And also the wrathfulness began to make, a slow, stewing fire fueled by treason, by the consummation that the people he'd trusted most had deceived him in the most abecedarian way possible. His aspect shifted back to Phyllis, and also to Victor, and he realized that nothing would ever be the same. The room, formerly filled with the comforting vision of family consanity, now felt like a battleground littered with the remains of falsehoods and half-trueness. Every word, every regard, every touch in his life sounded reframed, tainted by the disclosure he'd just entered. Phyllis's eyes filled with gashes, her own guilt and helplessness apparent as she tried to reach out, but Daniel quailed, the hurt too raw, the treason too deep. "I see, and I don't know what to suppose presently," he stammered, voice shaking, each word a painful trouble. Victor, standing resolute, allowed a brief moment of silence to settle, knowing that words could only do so much now. The verity had been delivered. The rest was over to Daniel, over to him to navigate the unfaithful waters of identity, fidelity, and family bonds that had just been violently readdressed. Outdoors, the wind howled against the Newman estate, a befitting incident to the tempest within the room, and for the first time in his life, Daniel felt truly untethered, cast adrift in an ocean of exposures that hovered to gulf everything he allowed. He knew, and yet, amidst the desolation, there was a flicker of clarity, a spark that maybe, one day, this knowledge could come a tool for understanding, for reclaiming his agency in a world dominated by power, manipulation, and long-held secrets. But that day was Ent moment. Moment was for shock, for wrathfulness, for the implacable battle with the verity. Moment, Daniel would have to face the fact that his entire life had been erected on foundations of deception, and the man who had just slighted Phyllis and revealed the ultimate secret, the man he'd both stressed and deified, Victor Newman, had irrevocably altered the course of his actuality. With a single concession, Daniel's father wasn't who he believed. His father was Jack Abbott, and the world he'd known could no way be the same again. And as he sat there, pulsing and broken in ways he'd no way imagined, the enormity of the treason, the magnitude of the disclosure, and the shattering reality of his new identity pressed down upon him like an impregnable avalanche, leaving him questioning everything, trusting no bone. And yet, formally beginning the painful trip toward reclaiming his own verity, one agonizing step at a time. Daniel's mind was a storm of clashing feelings, each one crashing into the coming with the force of a hurricane, leaving him dizzy, disoriented, and hugely shattered. The disclosure that Jack Abbott, the man whose veritably name had been a symbol of power, manipulation, and grim ambition in Genoa City, was his real father, hit him with a force that made everything differently in his life pale in comparison. Every memory of his parenting, every assignment learned from the man he'd always called Dad, suddenly came a twisted, distorted shadow of the verity. His vision blurred with gashes that he couldn't contain, gashes that carried with them times of unacknowledged frustration, confusion, and treason. Phyllis, still pulsing from Victor's poke, cautiously stepped closer, trying to reach him, her voice low and conditional. "Daniel, please, try to understand it wasn't about lying to hurt you. It was about guarding you from effects you weren't ready to face," she said, her words nearly drowning in the still heavy silence of the room. But Daniel could slightly hear her. Every syllable from Victor's mouth, every disclosure, had resounded in his brain like a cannon shot. How could the veritably people he trusted most, Victor, the man who had been a father figure, and Phyllis, who had always been the anchor in his life, allow such a abecedarian deception to do? How could they manipulate his life so profoundly without him indeed suspecting a shred of the verity? Rage began to poach beneath his anguish, a slow burn that made his hands grip into fists as he tried to comprehend the enormity of the treason. He could feel the adrenaline surging through him, a potent admixture of fear, wrathfulness, and shock, each emotion amplifying the coming. And also, as the room sounded to close in on him, the physical weight of the treason pressing against his casket like an iron vice, he realized that this wasn't just about the disclosure itself, it was about everything that had come ahead, the falsehoods, the half-trueness, the manipulations, and the careful unity of his entire life, without his concurrence. He felt both victimized and maddened, and in that crooked emulsion, there was a clarity, a horrifying, painful clarity, that the world as he'd known it was no longer his. His voice quivered, raw with emotion, as he turned toward Phyllis. "You knew all this? You let me live a taradiddle? Every single moment? And you didn't tell me?" he demanded, his words sharp, cutting through the air like shanks. Phyllis tried to fit, but the sight of him, broken and betrayed, made her falter, her own guilt and fear constricting her voice. Victor, seeing the delicate balance of control stirring, remained silent, his imposing presence a constant memorial that he was both the precursor of verity and the arbitrator of consequences. Daniel's aspect also darted toward Victor, and in that moment, he saw the layers of the man he'd known, ruthless, commanding, but also, in this moment, incontrovertibly paternal in a way that was both comforting and infuriating. "And you allowed." This was the right time. Daniel's voice cracked, his tone a admixture of blameworthiness and despair. "You slighted her in front of me, and you dropped this on me? How could you? How could anyone suppose I was ready for this?" Victor's eyes, dark and unyielding, met Daniel's with the kind of intensity that left no room for denial, no space for argument. "Because the time is now," he said still but forcefully, each word reverberating with the weight of inarguable verity. "You earn to know who you are. Not some fabricated interpretation of your life, but the real you. Jack Abbott is your father. That's your verity, Daniel. Whether you accept it or not, it doesn't change the data." Daniel felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, a monumental bouleversement that left him stunning, both physically and emotionally. His mind replayed every commerce, every family gathering, every word of advice, every assignment learned, and he plotted to attune the interpretation of his life he'd always believed with the bone. That victor had just shattered before his eyes. He felt wrathfulness, yes, but also an painning sense of loss, the grief of realizing that a continuance of recollections and jests had been erected upon a foundation of dishonesty. And also there was Jack, the man whose name had always been rumored in corridors of power and contest, whose presence had always impended large in the commercial battles of Genoa City, whose shadow Daniel had admired, stressed, and maybe indeed respected from hence without realizing the particular connection, was now, suddenly, incontrovertibly, his father. The study was inviting, nearly unsupportable, as he imagined the first meeting, the battle, the ineluctable collision of wrathfulness, confusion, and craving. How would Jack reply? Would he embrace him, reject him, or see him as nothing further than a pawn in the endless games of commercial warfare? And what of his fidelity to the man he'd always known as Dad, to Victor, the man who had raised him, guided him, and shaped him into the person he'd come? The conflict tore at him from all sides, each thread of constancy, each bond of trust, hanging to unravel his veritably identity. Phyllis, seeing his twisting feelings, reached out again, placing a conditional hand on his arm. Daniel didn't break as he left the Newman estate, his mind a whirlwind of wrathfulness, confusion, and the hopeless need for answers. Each step toward Abbot Mance felt heavier than the last, as though every treason, every taradiddle, every moment of his life erected on falsehood was pressing down on him, demanding acknowledgement. By the time he arrived, the late autumn sun was casting long murk across the impeccably manicured meadows, a deceptive calm over a menage that had seen further power struggles, secrets, and backstabbings than any other in Genoa City. Jack Abbott was in his office, reviewing papers, ignorant that the walls of his life were about to be shattered in a way that had nothing to do with combinations or business deals. When Daniel entered, there was an evanescent pause, a detail, nearly inappreciable flicker in Jack's eyes that spoke of recognition, though he'd no idea why. Daniel's voice, pulsing with raw emotion, filled the room before Jack could indeed ask a question. "Jack, I need answers. I need the verity." Jack looked up, confusion incontinently giving way to concern, also cautious curiosity. "Daniel who? What are you talking about?" Daniel's fists gripped at his sides, his knuckles white, and the room sounded to shrink around him, the air charged with the electricity of impending battle. "Duent played Victor told me. Phyllis tried to shield me, but I know now. You're my father," Jack said. The papers in his hands felt suddenly heavy, the office, with all its opulent trappings of power and control, suddenly inapplicable. He'd always imagined that one day, if this verity came out, it would be delicately handled, the timing precisely orchestrated. But Daniel's storm of emotion, raw and implacable, shattered all pretense. "Your father?" Jack repeated, disbelief and a trace of fear fluttering across his face. I do and understand. Why now? Why didn't anyone?" Daniel's voice cracked, a mixture of anguish and fury discovering out uncontrollably. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you let me grow up? Allowing someone differently was my pater. Letting me make my life on a taradiddle?" Jack stood, sluggishly, precisely, trying to remain calm as he gauged Daniel's emotional state, realizing that this wasn't just a discussion, but a reckoning. "Daniel, I can explain." "Explain?" Daniel cried, his voice roaring across the office, each word loaded with pain. "Explain the times of deception? The moments I trusted people who were lying to me every day. Do you know how that feels? To realize that everything, every choice, every memory, every bond one allowed, was real, was erected on falsehoods?" Jack's expression softened slightly, a hint of anguish in his eyes, but he knew words alone couldn't bridge the ocean that had suddenly opened between them. "I know I wanted you to find out this way," he admitted, his voice low and steady, though Daniel slightly registered it. "I wanted to be sure the timing was right, that you could handle it. But I know I anticipated it to come like this, full of wrathfulness and confusion." Daniel's wrathfulness, still, was impregnable, a tidal surge of emotion that left him raw and exposed. "Handle it," he screamed. "You call this handling it? I've been living in a taradiddle my whole life, and